Hey, Ebony,
Yeah.
you want to go see the movie with me?
Yeah, when?
I don't know.
Yeah, let's go.
Why don't we arrange a date live on air?
Let's do it. Let's give out our cell phone numbers live on air.
Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is episode 57. I'm your host, Anita Sarkeesian, and I'm joined, as always, by my fellow princesses of power, or horde princesses, really, depending on how I feel on any given day. Carolyn Pettit.
Hey.
And Ebony Astor.
Hey.
Who's also Adams, and I just fucked that up. Whatever. You can call Ebony whatever you want.
No, don't tell people that.
Just don't call her late for dinner. Heyo.
Oh my gosh.
Boy.
Back to the Borscht Belt circuit with you.
Whew. Well, other than being a terrible pun show, this is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love. Or alternatively, we're the feminist killjoys coming for your media, depending on your perspective. Today, we're going to be talking about the new Netflix series, She-Ra, and the Princesses of Power. After that, we'll finish the show by each sharing a little something in What's Your Freak-Out? Now on with the show. Hey.
So, Anita, you just got back from quite a period of time away. Where have you been? What you been doing?
Forever. Do you know what I was doing? I sat on airplanes for 52 hours across an 18-day period. How's that for fun?
I wouldn't do that.
No.
Yeah, that sucked. That part sucked. But no, I had a really interesting trip. I did a talk in Vienna. That was lovely, and we had so many fans there, which was also lovely.
Oh, that's lovely to hear.
Yeah. And then I went to Cape Town, South Africa, for a games festival called Playtopia. And Cape Town is beautiful and wonderful and totally worth the 24-hour trek that it takes to get there. But it was really great, and it was really cool to see, seeing international game scenes and what's happening in those spaces. I do have to say I was really kind of disappointed to go all the way to Africa and have it still be very white, because games are very white, and we should do something about that. But it was good. I had a really good time. Lots of great people. And then, I went to London, and I saw the V&A has the Victoria and Albert Museum has an exhibit on video games right now, so I checked that out, and we're in it.
Yo,
there's a whole table
awesome.
about tropes as one of the sort of disruptors of culture in the exhibit. And
I love that cartoon.
There's a whole the exhibit is set up in divided into 4 sections, and one of the sections is about disruptors. So there was lots of folks who were interviewed for it, lots of different kinds of games, discussions about gender and race and sexuality in games, and highlighting different people's work and conversations, and it was cool. Also funny. I was standing there looking at me, and
like in a mirror?
No, in the exhibit, because the tropes video was playing. And I sort of stepped away, and these 2 young women walked up, and they started watching the video, and then they started arguing about it, and it was really funny. And I just had this moment of do they see me? Am I invisible? Is this happening in front of me? Do I say something? And I just stood there awkwardly, just eavesdropping, and it was really funny.
Did you ever out yourself?
No, I didn't. I really thought about it, though. I should have been hey, she's a real dumbass, huh?
You could have made that an amazing story for them if you had saddled up and been yo, I agree with everything you're saying. I think this argument is bullshit. I can't believe I ever put that to, I recorded that stuff. You're right.
Wouldn't that be funny?
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of them was arguing about how, I critique GTA, but, it's realistic, so my critiques aren't fair. And the other one was no, that's not what she's saying. And it was really funny to watch. So, yeah, so that was cool. And then I took a little, I was in Norway in the mountains for a minute, which was lovely. So, yeah, that was my trip. Now I'm back. I'm still trying to get over jet lag.
And don't you leave again soon for another trip?
Shut up. Why do you have to remind me of these things? Yeah, I'm going to Zurich in January for another games conference called Ludicious. So anyone out in Switzerland, let me know. I probably won't hang out with you. Sorry.
Wow. Okay.
Anyways, yeah. So how were things back home?
Yeah, fine.
Not as
Nothing to report
interesting
here.
not as interesting as what you were up to, obviously.
You know, Ebony and I held down the podcast for it. Same old, just
All right.
doing our thing.
Well, hey, Carolyn, why don't you show to me? Show to me? Wow. This is going to be a long episode. Why don't you show me how excellently you deliver the entertainment news?
Oh, that was a cool segue. That was smooth.
It would have worked if I didn't fumble over my words.
All right, so first story in entertainment news this week is that CBS paid actor Eliza Dushku $9.5 million to settle her sexual harassment claims after she was brought on to the hit series Bull, which I've never heard of, but apparently it's the 10th most watched series on network television and is a big hit for CBS. And so she was brought on. She was going to have like a 3-episode arc on the series as a prelude to her potentially becoming a full cast member. But during her time on set, she was routinely harassed by the show's star, Michael Weatherly. And after she confronted the star about his behavior, she was written off the show. She believes that her time on the show came to a sudden end because as retaliation for her coming forward with, for her going to Weatherly himself to speak to him about his inappropriate behavior. And after she went through mediation with CBS, the company agreed to a confidential settlement that would pay her $9.5 million. Interestingly, so there was a board of lawyers kind of investigating the culture at CBS already in the wake of the Les Moonves's kind of history of harassing women at CBS. And they found that in their report to CBS, they told CBS that the company's handling of Ms. Dushku's complaints was, I'm quoting from the New York Times story about this now, was, quote, not only misguided, but emblematic of larger problems at CBS. When faced with instances of wrongdoing, the company has a tendency to protect itself at the expense of victims. However, the most illuminating thing about this story, the most like mind-blowing thing about it, to at least in my mind, is that when Ms. Dushku entered into mediation with CBS, a guy named Mark Engstrom, the chief compliance officer at CBS, handed over video outtakes from the show, believing that they would discredit Eliza Dushku because they showed her swearing on set. And not understanding, oblivious to the fact that the outtakes he was handing over actually showed the very sexism and the very harassment that she was claiming that Weatherly engaged in. So it was like a goldmine for like Dushku's representatives in the mediation process. How sexist do you have to be to like hand over video or outtakes that contain the very thing that you're being accused of? And
like he just didn't know that was harassment.
Yeah, exactly. Like apparently
like, saw it and was like, "Oh, this is normal."
Yes.
Yeah. You know what is super upsetting about this story? I mean, all of it, obviously, but 2 of Michael Weatherly's former co-stars from NCIS posted social media to their social media accounts. I think both Instagram. I know one of them was Polly Perrette. I can't remember the name of the other actor. But essentially sort of, messages of support. So there are pictures of, these individual actors with Michael Weatherly, these past photos saying like, he's a great guy. I support him forever and whatever. And it's just, it's so upsetting because, in the wake of Me Too, this kind of, full-throated support of perpetrators instead of victims has increasingly come into the limelight. And, we have to keep saying like, abusers, harassers, people who assault, people who exploit others, they are very, very smart about when and where and to whom they pull their stunts, right? And just because someone has not been abusive to you does not mean that they have not been abusive to someone else. And there's just something so gross about these, successful women choosing in this moment to stand up and support. I understand, sometimes you're friends with or, family members with someone who's like fucked up, but the rush cannot be to defend them at the expense of the victims, and especially by saying, like, I never saw this behavior, so it could not have happened. Man, fuck off.
Yeah.
I just Googled his name because I didn't know who he was, and the top stories on Google are all about his co-stars being like, he's a good guy. And you're like, what? Just keep that to yourself. Like, even if you think that and you don't want to believe the victims or the survivors, like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if he, like, reached out.
I know. I was just thinking that.
Privately, and was like, hey, can I get some support from you publicly? Because this is starting to make me look bad.
Yeah.
And speaking of Me Too and support for, victims and survivors as opposed to perpetrators, there was an interview in the New York Times with Megan Fox, who was asked in that interview why, she did not kind of come forward at the sort of height of, the Weinstein allegations breaking and, like, the height of the kind of the initial Me Too movement happening. And her response is kind of revealing and interesting. She said, quote, I just didn't think, based on how I'd been received by people and by feminists, that I would be a sympathetic victim. And I thought if ever there were a time where the world would agree that it's appropriate to victim blame someone, it would be when I came forward with my story. So back in 2009, Megan Fox sort of was public in interviews about some of the awful treatment she'd gotten from Michael Bay on the set of, Bad Boys 2, I think, as well as the Transformers films. And those comments were not, like, well received, and her career kind of floundered potentially as a result of that. So I can understand why she may have felt like the public would not have been so supportive of her kind of coming forward with stories like that. And that's such a shame. It's
so tragic because it's like, because she is a sexualized woman in the media, the idea that because she's like, because of the way she has been received, I have absolutely critiqued representations that she has been a part of. But that doesn't ever mean that it's okay to, like, harass, abuse, or not support women who come forward in that way. And I think about that a lot with stuff around, like, Gamergate and when that was all happening. As if it stopped. That's funny. But that, like, there were women who got caught up in that who I didn't, like, intellectually agree with or even like what they were doing, but I still supported them not being harassed, right? Like, it's so sad. It's more of this sort of suffering and silence that happens around these kinds of issues. Also, why can't you have any good news, Carol? God, what's wrong with you? You're so negative all the time.
I'll try.
Apparently the new Spider-Man movie is amazing. That's good news. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm so looking forward to it. Everyone is loving it.
I know. Hey, Ebony.
Super good.
You want to go see the movie with me?
Yeah, when?
I don't know.
Yeah, let's go.
Why don't we arrange a date live on air?
Let's do it. Let's give out our cell phone numbers live on air.
Cool. I love this plan.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of cell phone numbers,
I feel another smooth segue coming up.
Damn it, I can't come up with anything.
Oh, I take it back.
Did you know that we can keep bringing Feminist Frequency Radio to the airwaves because of you? It's true. If you're enjoying our show, please consider joining our podcast community at d.rip/femfreak. You'll get access to some fun perks and bonus episodes. So that's d.rip/femfreak. Shall we move on to the main?
Yeah, let's do it.
So I am super excited that we're going to talk about She-Ra, the Princesses of Power, which I'm going to read a lovely statement that Carolyn wrote about it. Is a bold reimagining of the 1980s cartoon She-Ra. With cartoonist Noelle Stevenson, known for her work on Nimona and Lumberjanes at the helm, the new She-Ra has some broad similarities and callbacks to the original series, but also establishes itself in an entirely new take on the source material with a completely different visual style and characters who have been dramatically changed from their original incarnations. So, one, I just want to shout out Noelle because I've known her since she was in art school. And I've been following her work, and she's so fucking talented. Like, the shit she was producing in art school, like, came to be like best-selling books and shit and cartoons and like the work that she's been doing on comics and then TV shows. And I'm just like, I was so excited for her, and I'm so excited for us to be able to have the stuff that she makes in the world. So shout out to Noelle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this might be a generational thing between us, but I was like, She-Ra was fucking huge for me when I was a kid. Like, that was who I would pretend to be on like fucking kindergarten school grounds and shit.
Is there any photographic evidence of this? Are there any home movies?
I wish.
Will you just recreate it for me and Caro? Okay.
I will. I'll do it on our date. How about that, Ebony?
I'm so into this.
Anyway, so I was like very curious about what this would be, just because I felt so strongly attached to She-Ra as a kid. But
see, I was not, and it wasn't so much generational, and I definitely want to get into this later. My younger brother was a huge He-Man fan, and I actually tried to get him to yell out into a microphone so I could play it for you guys. For the power of Grayskull.
Yes.
But I wasn't able to make that happen. Anyways,
He-Man said his call was, "I have the power."
Well,
but he also says something about Grayskull, doesn't he?
It's a two-parter, Anita. First, as he draws the sword, he says, "By the power of Grayskull," and then as like the lightning magic stuff starts to happen, then he shouts, "I have the power."
Okay, quick aside here. Caro, you know how we did your incredibly wonderful dramatic reading of Ready Player One?
I sure do.
I'm thinking we might need a one-woman performance of a classic He-Man or She-Ra episode because your dramatic skills unparalleled. But so anyways, I didn't watch She-Ra, and like I said, I want to talk about this later, but I specifically did not watch She-Ra because based purely upon the sense I got of it from the toys and like, the commercials and trailers for it I saw on TV, I thought this is pandering to girls in a way that I am just not interested in, and I wish I had actually taken the time to watch the show and find out what was actually going on, but I prejudged it as a kid, and I wish I had not. I wish I had that kind of like, historical memory of the original She-Ra, but now it's kind of too late. Like, it's too late for me to go back as an 87-year-old woman and experience the original She-Ra, in the way that a child would have. But I think I was very proud of being a young girl who didn't like girly things. I was very proud of that in a very fucked up way. And I'm so hopeful that we're not there yet, but we are starting to get to a point where, young kids are a tiny bit less bound by that expectation. They still are to a large extent, but a tiny bit less bound.
Yeah. So, okay, cartoon, like, if you go back and watch, so I'm a little bit bummed that I didn't have enough time to go back and watch some of the original She-Ra, but I remember watching a few episodes like 5 or 6 years ago. It's fucking bad, right? Like,
it's bad.
It's programming in the 80s and television generally up until like the late 90s. Was not good. It was not considered like high art or there weren't huge budgets or anything like that. I think that what's the HBO show? The Sopranos was one of the first ones where it was like, oh, this can like TV can be different, right?
Well, in terms of like peak TV and prestige TV.
Yeah.
But in terms of animation, I think kids animation. I think like it's kind of the Scooby-Doo effect, right? Like there was very little money, so you have like backgrounds that are constantly being reused and plots and themes that are constantly being recycled. Yeah. And the art, is not necessarily something that's particularly captivating. And still these things made such a huge impression on us culturally, right? Like if you were to look at, Scooby-Doo cartoons from back in the day, you're not gonna be blown away by the animation. And yet Scooby-Doo is still such a huge thing.
Yeah. And also you have to think, give in the era of specifically like Transformers, He-Man, She-Ra. I mean, I loved a lot of those shows, but also they were basically functioning as commercials to sell toys.
Yeah,
like
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, they're not great. And it's really interesting. Like, it's actually really interesting that someone who did not grow up with She-Ra is like in charge of reimagining it, right? And I think that there's a lot of like there's something really interesting about that. And when I watch this show, I'm like, wow, like you can see the themes and you can see the basic like elements to it, but it's wildly different. And I think some of it is that we have expectations for certain animation now to play up to higher audience, older audiences as well as younger audiences. So the themes need to be slightly more complex, right? Like there's so much more happening in the new She-Ra.
It's so much more interesting. I mean, in particular, like, as a what I think a really strong example of how the new She-Ra is much more interesting. You know, in both He-Man and She-Ra, the original series, like Skeletor and He-Man and Hordak and the Horde in She-Ra, they were just like unambiguously bad, right? And like everyone in the Horde was like unambiguously bad, basically. What's fascinating to me watching the new She-Ra is the way that Catra is this very sympathetic character, even though she remains, at least so I watched up through the 11 episodes. I ran out of time. But you know, she remains aligned with the Horde, and you totally understand why she remains aligned with the Horde, because she feels like she belongs there. And whereas, you know, there's this element for me of like the rebellion, the good guys, which, you know, consists of course, She-Ra and Glimmer and Bo and these other princesses that they start recruiting to the rebellion, is, you know, like, is there, are there more like rigid kind of gender expectations in that space? You know, you have this princess named Scorpia who's with the Horde, and she says, you know, they made me feel different. Like she didn't feel accepted in that space. Also, Catra rocking that tux to the princess prom.
Oh my God.
So
and that
cool.
dance scene, the dance
So
scene,
good.
so good. Yeah, I mean, like, so diving in to this version of She-Ra, I was so impressed. Like the way we are introduced to Adora, whose alter ego we will learn is She-Ra, the mighty She-Ra, is when she is, you know, practicing as a member, like in training to try and become a force captain of the Horde, right? And I think the show so deftly, for a kid's show, you know, presents this idea that like context is everything and perspective is important, right? Because there is a version of this show in an alternate universe whereby, you know, Adora fights for the Horde, and that is considered, those are considered the good guys, right? Like, because that's her side, that's who we've been introduced to. And so, you know, the perspective of who thinks they are righteous changes. Everyone thinks that their side is right? And it's largely something that is put upon us by others. We listen to what our leaders have told us about our so-called enemies. But I think the show, like, very, very smartly, you know, tells us that, you know, everyone is a hero in their own story. The people of the Horde, except for people like Shadow Weaver or Hordak themselves, but the folks at the lower level, they don't think of themselves as villains. They don't think of themselves as, you know, malevolent actors. They are convinced they are doing what is right in the same way that folks on the other side are.
Yeah.
I love it.
And Catra's kind of bitterness around you know, the way that the dynamic that always existed between her and Adora, you know, and then ultimately feeling kind of abandoned by Adora. Like, it's so understandable. Like, you understand why she feels the way that she does. And I just love that they've made her, like, I imagine a lot of kids watching this show will look at Catra and feel like, oh, you know, I feel like an outsider too a lot of the time. I understand Catra, like that she'll be the character maybe that they in some way relate to the most.
Yeah, I love that I feel like it's sort of a darker version of My Little Pony in terms of the discussions around friendship, right? And like what friendship means. And in My Little Pony, it's very celebratory in most of the time. And in this, I feel like there's lots of different dynamics that they are trying to articulate and illuminate, and like giving young people like language to understand that. So in Princess Prom, the conversation around Glimmer and Bo, and how Glimmer feels like she's trying to repress how upset she is that Bo is hanging out with somebody else. And like he says, you don't get to take your anger out on me. Like I didn't do anything wrong. And like I was like, that's such great like emotional education at such a young age to like that might even be useful for adults to hear, right? I saw that and was like, that's great.
Yo, I loved Bo. I loved Bo so much.
Do you watch Blackish?
Yeah. Not consistently, but yeah.
So Marcus Scribner, who voices Bo, is the exact same character on Blackish, and I just it's so delightful. Like it was such good voice casting.
Yeah, so my partner's oldest kid, I will take the credit for introducing her to this version of She-Ra. Like I was taking her to school one day and I was like, yo, have you been watching She-Ra? We talk about Steven Universe all the time. Have you been watching this? She hadn't watched it yet. The very next day she texted me and was like, I binged through all the episodes. Let's talk about it. And one of the things that she brought up, having spoken to kids at school, is how much they love Bo and the kind of different sort of boyishness he inhabits in the show. Like, yo, kids today, so much smarter than I was. But they love what kind of a boy he is. And the way that he says things like this is it. We're being shown a boy who is competent in his own right, but never attempts to overshadow the girls and the women that he is surrounded by, and explicitly says things like, I trust you. I believe in you. That is so huge. That is so huge, especially when we're having this conversation about young boys apparently not wanting to read books that star, girl protagonists or not what shows with girl protagonists. And of course, we're showing the lie inherent in that, which is that gatekeepers don't allow young boys to consume those things. But given, the freedom to choose, they are as likely to enjoy those things as girls are to enjoy things with male protagonists.
Also, his midriff.
Yes. And the way he pulls off the cummerbund for the prom, he's like, that's my thing. Show him my belly.
I loved it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I haven't finished it yet. I hadn't had time, but I feel like I feel like it's so much more complicated to have Adora be like, fuck, how do I do this? Right? Like these were my friends. And I don't know if that I think that they very quickly made it so that she is like, okay, I'm fighting for justice now. And like, there's all this like recruiting happening and what have you. And I want to see a little more of the tension, right? Like, she sees Catra at the prom and she's just immediately like, you're up to something, I don't trust you, which makes sense. And like, I want to see her emotionally struggle a little bit more.
I think you will
I imagine I will, but
in the latter episodes, at least, there's definitely some really meaty Adora Catra stuff that happens.
Yeah.
That really kind of fleshes out their whole history to some degree.
Oh, cool. I look forward to that.
Yeah. And I love that, you have in these supporting princesses, I particularly like Entrapta as this because she's so like socially awkward, in her own way. And she
is she the tech one or the aloof one?
The tech one. Because she spends more time with tech than with people, and she's very like socially awkward, but still the show is presenting her in basically like a positive light, right? Like, hey, it's cool that she can do all this tech stuff, and it's kind of okay that she's socially awkward, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know. I just think that's super cool.
How do you feel about race in the show?
Yeah. I have to admit, like, at first, especially in the first few episodes, when seeing She-Ra as this, like, borderline like Aryan figure in the white robes and like with the long flowing blonde hair and everything, like leading these people of color, it did make me uncomfortable. I think the dynamic the show takes great pains to establish over time that although She-Ra's like the main character and stuff, that the dynamic of friendship is very much one of relying on each other. People, it's not always She-Ra saving others. She-Ra gets saved by other people. Adora gets saved by other people a lot of the time too. So I don't think the dynamic really bears out like but still those images did kind of make me uncomfortable. I don't know.
Yeah, I wasn't over, but obviously that's part of the She-Ra mythology, right? Like, she is this, sort of blonde Amazonian, goddess figure. But yeah, I mean, of the things to celebrate on this show, apart from like how incredibly gay it is, which is so good, but the fact that it has a multi-ethnic voice cast and is, not predominantly white. The overwhelming tendency for fantasy worlds to only have white casts, to be peopled with only white people, is dire. So the fact that we had people, obviously we can't map the characters in this fictional world onto, human races, but the fact that you have what is clearly like a mixed race society, in a way that we didn't in the original series, I thought was great.
Yeah, so that wasn't apparent in the first few episodes, so I was a little bit anxious because so outside of Bo, the show is predominantly women, which is great. Outside of Bo, though, I was like, oh, so the only person of color right now is what's her face, the Shadow Weaver. And it was like just all of these white people, and it was the evil black woman. And I was like, oh, please tell me this is going to be but not like this.
But in the first episode,
right?
When we see Adora practicing with her team is multi-ethnic. And I was actually really excited by that, because going back to what Kara was saying at the top, there are some ways in which the way the Horde is organized seems to be more egalitarian in some ways than the Rebellion does. And so like Adora's team is multi-ethnic. And I think we have, certainly, there's the suggestion that maybe there's some, obviously like the sort of gender nonconformity in the Horde is just accepted and normal. So I don't know. I think we could stand to have more people in the forefront who are non-white characters, but they are there.
Yeah. And okay, so one of the things that's new is that like the whole idea of the princesses, right?
Right.
I believe that's new.
Well, weren't the princesses in the last series? Because like Mermista and Entrapta and stuff, weren't they princesses?
Remember, man.
I did not recall them, perhaps, but certainly like the original show was called She-Ra, Princess of Power, and this show is called She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. So that's like at least a subtle shift right there.
And do you feel like it is... So, we have problems with like... Or I have problems with like royalty in general, but also the princess mythology, which I'm sure we've talked about before and everyone knows, whatever. Anyways, but like, so yeah, I'm just curious, like, do you think that the sort of reimagining of what a princess is and the capabilities and the sort of diversity of, and I don't mean that by race, I mean that by like personality. Like, do you like the way do you like that framing?
I do, because to me, it read as almost as if princess was like a synonym for chieftain or warlord or something, right? So when we first are introduced to Adora in that practice session, they say like, princesses are vicious and violent, which is not a phrase we typically ever hear. That's not the way
princess was hilarious.
Exactly, right? And then the way that the princesses, come from and are allied with different kingdoms. Yeah, like I'm not in love with the whole notion of like, monarchy and inherited titles, but the way that it was used in this show almost is, less of an inherited title, but more as sort of a statement of badassery,
Yeah, yeah. And it almost feels a little Harry Potter-ish with the three kids going out on a mission to like convince people to join the rebellion and like fight evil demons or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I think like this show, so it's 2018, this show comes out, and I think there are definite callbacks to things like really iconic animation from the past decade. So things like Avatar: The Last Airbender or Steven Universe, like you can see the influence of those kinds of things. And you had that similar like, trio, taking to the world, finding members to stir up the resistance in Avatar. Because I mean, like Frosta, like she reminded me so much of Toph. from Avatar.
That Avatar. I was like, wait, what are we talking about?
Avatar: The Last Airbender, not James Cameron's Avatar.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know what you're reading. Toph. She, and all those different worlds and shit. Absolutely. Sorry. I'm here. I'm paying attention.
Oh my gosh. Can we also just talk about the theme song? How the theme song is so great?
Is it? Because I keep skipping that shit. It's too
quit
anime
skipping
for me. It's so bad.
I have to watch it every time.
Oh man, I watched it once because I felt like I was obligated to, and then I can't do that again.
You're missing out.
It's like 15 seconds. It's 15 seconds of pure pop confection.
It feels like 15 hours.
Oh my God. Anita, I'm rethinking going to see Spider-Man with you.
Oh, breaking my heart, Ebony.
Yeah. I love this show, y'all.
Did you finish it?
I did. I binged it in like a day and a half because I could not quit watching. You know, it's funny. I am in love with the fact that She-Ra is actually a teenager. Like, she's actually a teenager, and I don't want to say she looks like a teenager, because what does that mean? Everybody grows and develops at, different rates, but she looks like what we'd imagine a teenager to look like. I am so glad that she is not like super busty. Not that there's anything wrong with being busty, but I am so glad that she has not been sexualized in a certain way, particularly because, we do this so unconsciously that the default, the assumption is that, women's bodies, it's very important that they be attractive to straight men, even if they are, entirely fictional women and, regardless of whether they are of age or not. I love the way she is drawn. I love the way Glimmer is drawn. Like, give me a chubby hero. Yes. I love this show.
Well, the other thing about the masculinity stuff is that I loved when, like, you're first introduced to Bo, and he, like, not first, but one of the early scenes, he goes into Glimmer's room and starts folding her clothes and, like, cleaning up.
Yes. And he wears, like, a big heart on his chest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which the Bo from the original did as well. But he was he was a very different character. Like, he was a white guy. I don't know. And obviously he was like an adult, like all the characters were, adults.
In my brain, the guy who plays Seahawk, he seems like what Bo was in the original.
That might be true, actually.
But I might be confusing things in my brain.
This kind of like sort of dashing.
There's a character that looks like Seahawk in She-Ra.
Yeah, that would be Bo. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, Ebony, to go back to what you were just saying, like, in fact, I don't know if you recall this or noticed it at the time, but in fact, certain segments of male YouTubers and whatnot, like, did flip the fuck out about the fact that Adora is not, like, sexualized in this version and how she looks. And, they included, like, personal attacks on Noelle Stevenson, on how she looks, because she, doesn't present in the most traditionally feminine way, and, is vile. Like these men, again, like that sense that, as you say, that like these female characters need to be designed in some way to be attractive to even adult, like, straight men, it's perverse, right? Like, this show is not for you. Like, not everything has to cater to you.
I hate that every fucking conversation we have about new media now includes, like, aggressive backlash from shitty dudes. Like, come on.
Yeah. And to me, the thought of kids, watching shows like Steven Universe and shows like this, it's just great. Like, these cartoons are so much better in terms of their values, their compassionate kind of outlook, their representations, everything, than anything that I had available to me when I was a young person. And I just think it's wonderful that children's programming has kind of shifted in this direction in a lot of ways.
Are there any shows from when you were a kid that you would like to see reimagined like this?
Captain Caveman.
What?
I said Captain Caveman, which you're way too young to remember. The Hair Bear Bunch. I would like to see that. Jabberjaws.
I have no fucking idea what you're talking about.
You know what's great is that all of the other 87-year-olds who listen to this show are going to hit me up and I'm going to be validated. They're going to hear me say Captain Caveman and they're going to fucking lose their minds. But yo, Hanna-Barbera, I got you. I will always represent.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's She-Ra. I mean, I know I'm older than you, Anita, but She-Ra was definitely a big show for me too. So this is kind of it. Like, I mean, the other stuff that I was into was like G.I. Joe. I have no interest in seeing G.I. Joe. Like, you can't.
Wait, you didn't like that movie? What's wrong with you?
I never saw the movie. I know that the movies weren't good. You know, He-Man, which I'd much rather She-Ra.
He-Man is so gay. It is the gayest shit, and I love it for it. Like, I love that.
When I was a kid, I had no sense of how of camp, and that Skeletor was pure camp. But now, anytime I see a clip of Skeletor, I'm like, oh my god, he is pure. He is a pure camp villain.
I'm gonna put in the show notes one of my favorite remixes, which is just He-Man set to Four Non-Blondes. And it is like, and it's funny because it's so gay, right? Like, it's gay. And there's no other way to describe it. But then you go and you rewatch the show and you're like, oh, this was just text. Like, this isn't like, oh, they're pulling it out and making it seem that way as like a remix artist. It's fucking great. I love it.
Yeah, but I mean, when we talk about He-Man being gay, or as Caro says, being camp, to whatever extent you could use a term like homoerotic here, and to that extent is probably not very far. But anyways, it's when I say that this new version of She-Ra is very gay and great, we mean something totally different, right? Like Scorpia, for instance, who is this just amazing butch stud character. I can't remember a time when we've seen a character like this. Like, I honestly can't. And it's probably, it's my own limitation because I don't watch, every cartoon that comes out. So I don't know what else is out there. But I was blown away that we got this character and that we were not encouraged to laugh at her. I mean, she's simple and she's sweet, but she is not meant to be a figure of fun because she is large and muscular and because she clearly has, a crush on Catra. And she clearly cares so much about what Catra thinks about her and dresses up for her in the Princess Prom. Like, I'm blown away that we have a character like this. The Princess Prom, when we were talking about doing the show, I was like, oh, hey, make sure that if you don't get to see the whole season, watch Princess Prom. Like, I think there's something fucking revolutionary going on in a cartoon for kids when you have an episode like Princess Prom in it. I really do.
Yeah, I mean, again, just even seeing Catra in that tux, too. For me, that was like, oh my! Like, if I'd seen that as a kid, it would have been like just revolutionary, right? To see a woman, a female character, kind of not conforming to gender expectations, and presented in a way that looks cool as hell, like. Oh, it's so awesome.
Yeah, and as I mentioned that dance scene, which it's kind of a play off romantic comedies, like the dance scene that happens in romantic movies or romantic TV shows or whatever, but it happens exclusively among women. So we go from Glimmer and Adora dancing to Glimmer or Adora dancing with Perfuma to, being whisked away in this incredibly romantic, and sly and seductive dance with Catra. This is so new. This is so new and it's so necessary. And oh my God, I love this fucking show. I love it.
Yeah. So obviously we hated it. And you should definitely not watch it. And God, I can't believe they ruined my childhood.
Where are the boobs? Give back her boobs.
Oh my God. All right, y'all. This show's amazing. Go watch it if you haven't watched it. Let's do a little freaking out, shall we? What's your freak out? Hey, Ebony.
Yeah.
What's freak out this week?
I bring you news from some Black celebrity news, which is pop artist Cardi B, lately formerly of Love and Hip Hop New York. So if y'all don't know, which I assume you do, Cardi B is a hip hop artist. She recently had a baby with an artist called Offset. They were briefly married, but Cardi B announced that they were divorcing. Based upon Offset's serial adultery, right? Now, none of us are in Cardi B and Offset's relationship, but his adultery, is well known and acknowledged and admitted to, right? Since Cardi announced their divorce, Offset has just shown his ass in this very manipulative, exploitative way, trying to get her to take him back with these grand gestures. So posting like these long Instagram screeds, trying to have people intervene on his account. You know, it's gross. It is gross. And so lately, the last effort in this vein, over the weekend, the Rolling Loud Festival had Cardi B as a headliner. It's the very first time they've had a woman headline the music festival. The promotions team, the PR team, it's unclear who put this together, but they allowed Offset to come on stage while Cardi was performing, roll out a cake saying, "Take me back, Cardi." Take the mic. No, take the mic, you know, make his little sad ass case. And I'm infuriated about this, but I am more infuriated at the people who have come out of the woodwork like little fucking wood lice, talk about how she should take him back and how if this was a regular ass woman and your man came to your job and did this, you'd find it romantic. And just, the conversation we need to be having about these public gestures that many straight men invest in because they have been taught that this is the way they can behave when they are not getting their way in their relationship. That a woman is something to be worn down until she acquiesces to what you desire. And then, in fact, to wear her down is a demonstration of how much you care about her. This is so toxic. This is so horrifying. It's so poisonous. It's part of this, you know, phenomenon in so-called romantic movies where a man can do what is literally stalking of a woman. And that is meant to be evidence of how much he cares about her and how much he desires her. And a woman is supposed to take that and consider it, you know, an addition to or affirmation of her value in this person's eyes. It's horrifying. And the way that Cardi B is having, I mean, yes, she is a public figure. And yes, she did make this public announcement of the breakup between her and Offset. But, you know, you can make the argument that if you achieve a certain level of celebrity in certain fields these days, that kind of public statement is a preemptive move because you know the talk is going to be getting out there, so you have your PR team try and get ahead of it. But the way in which Offset is trying to legislate their relationship and sort of shame her or manipulate her into taking him back, it's just gross. And if y'all cape for him, you're trash, just like he is. So that's my freak out of the week. People being trash.
That's a good freak out, man. Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Men are terrible. Mm-hmm. All right, Carol.
All right. So my freak out this week is a film. It's by a filmmaker named Chloe Zhao. She's a Chinese filmmaker, but she made one of the most fascinating, in my mind, and distinctly American films of this year, a film called The Rider. And what The Rider is a film. It's a film that has basically no professional actors in it, and a lot of the people who are in it essentially play themselves. And it's based on a true incident, but it does have some fictionalized elements. But it's about a young man named Brady who is a sort of rodeo rider, right? He participates in rodeos, and at a certain point, he's injured in a rodeo. He gets thrown from a horse, and the horse like steps on his head, and he has to have like these stitches in his head, and it just really, it impacts his ability to do. You know, he needs a lot of physical recuperation after this, and so in a lot of ways, the film is this kind of examination of masculinity, really, and of and because this character, this real person, but it's fictionalized, but Brady has to kind of contend with like this idea that he may have to kind of let go of, his whole identity, his whole way of identifying himself has been as this kind of rodeo rider, this man who's very, capable physically, capable of getting out there and kind of dominating animals and being in that space. And he may have to give that up. And that's just very emotionally difficult for him. It's remarkable, the performances in this film, like how natural, everybody is at essentially playing themselves. It's such a beautiful film, and it came out in the early part of this year, got a lot of buzz then. I think because it was released in the start of the year, people are maybe kind of forgetting it now, or it's being overlooked now. But it's just a fascinating film about masculinity and damaged men, and by this Chinese female director. It's incredible.
What's the name of it again?
Nice.
It's called The Rider.
The Rider.
Cool. My freak out this week is a video game. I feel
what?
Like it's been
Anita,
a
you
long
hate
time
video
since
games.
I've talked about games.
You ruined gaming. What are you doing?
I know. So a game came out last week called Gris. Gr.
Yeah, it's the Spanish word for gray. So I guess
it's
pronounced...
so gris.
I don't actually know how it's pronounced. I just know that it's a Spanish word for gray.
Great. Well, the Spanish word for gray is a very good video game. It's this. It's like, I don't want to say too much about it because I really feel like people should play it. It is accessible in terms of it not being like super challenging. It's not like heavy mechanics. It feels like walking through a beautiful piece of art. The art is absolutely breathtakingly stunning. And what they do with it and how it moves in the world is very emotional. I think they do a lot with like the visual colors and visual styles to tell narrative and emotion. I think that the story itself, quote unquote, is very vague and, kind of, they might miss the mark a little bit in terms of what they're trying to communicate, but also it didn't really matter because you just felt so much playing this game. And I don't even know so much of what, right? But just breathtakingly beautiful and sort of sad and uplifting and all of these different things. It has, light puzzles. It has a little bit of platforming. There were moments while I was playing it that very warmly and fondly reminded me of other games, and not necessarily specifically, just like this almost ode to some of the best indie games that we've had over the past several years. So like there's little bits of like Sword and Sorcery and almost little bits of Fez in some ways, and the other things that I just couldn't remember. And it felt like this really beautiful, I don't know. It's gorgeous. Have you played it yet, Carol?
I started last night. I played for about 45 minutes. And my goodness, you're not kidding when you say this game is breathtaking. Like, it's legitimately stunning how beautiful this game is.
There's some really cool mechanical parts in the game. Mechanical. There's some really interesting puzzle stuff that they do with it that I almost wish they did a little bit more with, that I think people really enjoy. And maybe not this week, but I'd love to talk about it with you more, Carol. Maybe we can do
of course. I'm definitely going to finish it. It's
available currently on Steam. It's on Steam for Mac and PC, and it's available on Switch.
Is it the kind of thing that a neophyte non-gamer can play? Okay. Because it sounds interesting,
there's puzzles that you have to figure out, but it's definitely not.
So if you are not smart,
even your dumbass can play this game.
That's my question. I didn't know to ask the question, but I am not good.
That's one of the things. I love these kinds of games because it feels like I can offer it to almost anyone. I can say, just put it on and play it until you don't want to play it anymore, right? Like it's very accessible. And it's just, even if you don't finish it, which I really do recommend finishing it so you can see the fullness of the world. It's just such a beautiful experience. It's such a calming and tranquil experience. And, I think that there's value in that.
Awesome.
So you should definitely check it out.
Okay.
And then we'll chat about it. I don't think we have enough to talk about for a whole episode, which is why I didn't suggest it to be a whole episode. But, I would like to talk about it some more.
Right on.
Cool. Well, I am glad to be back. And that's our show.
We're glad to have you back. It's not the same when you're not here.
Yeah.
You're so
Humble
sweet.
bragging your way through your travelogue. Oh, I was just on Venus, communing with the Interplanetary Council.
Hey, when do I get to go to a games conference there, man?
I don't know.
take that.
I'm not sending you those invitations when they come in. They go right in the recycle bin.
Y'all, if you're inviting me to a games conference on Venus, you need to hit me up directly because you hear this.
Exactly.
Ebony's trying to sabotage
I'm blocking.
my life.
I am straight up blocking.
You can catch us back here with this delightful banter every single Wednesday. If you stay tuned, there will be a bonus episode, which is only available as a backer of this podcast, which you can be, and we highly recommend you be, so you can help us keep making this podcast. Just head over to d.rip/femfreak and figure it out from there. If you're enjoying this show, please rate and review us on iTunes. And when you're hanging out at the princess prom with your princess dates, because I know y'all aren't princesses, you're the plus ones, you should tell the princesses that you heard this really awesome podcast and that they should subscribe to it.
Wow.
That wasn't a good one. I'm sorry.
That was pretty good.
It was. I just.
was
It,
alright.
it made me.
Deliver it with the confidence that it was good.
I know.
It made me start
I'll
thinking
work
about
on
my
that.
status as a plus one, and I was like, "Wow, maybe that is what I am. I'm the plus one."
Ebony, you are a princess in my heart.
Aw, Anita.
Nah.
I'm gonna. You know what?
I've been
I am
gone
gonna
too
go out on a
long.
date with you.
Man, I've been gone too long. You gotta pull out all the Ebony bullshit so I can stop remembering.
I
you
never
so
put it
fondly.
away. I never put it away.
You two definitely have to go see Spider-Verse together.
I am.
That
Yeah,
movie
let's
is
do it.
rad.
It looks
Let's do it.
so good. It looks so
Yeah.
good.
All right, you can check out all of our work and our other podcasts at feministfrequency.com, and be sure to follow us on Twitter at FemFreak to stay up to date on all the news. You can find us individually on Twitter. I am at Anita Sarkeesian.
I'm at Carolyn Michelle.
I am at. Don't take him back, Cardi.
Our producer is Phil Circus, who also composed our theme music. Technical support by Sarah Norales, production assistance by Taylor Simmons, and art by Jamie Varon. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Later.